Hey there, this is Organic Midi Part 2, or How I Learned to Love the Human. Here's another virtual instrument in another track that I've been working on. I did a video for this. It was originally a live modular performance called Hall of Columns, where it was in my living room with my lovely fireplace and some incense. That was a really magical day. I'm feeling a little less inspired lately, but just pushing through it. You know how it is, COVID and all that. In this case, I'm using a different virtual instrument. Again, the quality of the virtual instrument can do a real lot. In this case, it has some built-in effects as well. It's called una Corda. Una Corda is a Kontakt instrument created by Native Instruments. It's a sampled version of a very specific, unique piano created in Europe. So one thing I like to do a lot is build a basic part and then layer notes on the top without adding an additional instrument. So there are aspects to what's being played that could not be played by a human. There's too many hands required to play this on a piano, but building it up on one instrument, building up the arrangement, can add something really captivating and cohesive rather than adding new instruments. So if we go back a bit, we can see the basic part over here, which is quieter due to the volume automation at this moment. But this is the basic part. It's staying on the grid for the most part. I'm not doing anything particularly monumental here in terms of the arrangement of the part. Let's go look at the Midi. I'm going to loop it. So here's the Midi. And the pedals being held down the whole time. Instruments that have sustain, it's a useful tool, and it would be worth looking into how piano players use pedals. You tend to play the next set of notes before releasing the pedals so it sounds continuous. So if you're playing a long section and the key changes, you would tend to drop the pedal on the new set of notes. So in this case, it would probably be here. Just drop it below half and see it resets the ringing of the notes. You can hear that the ringing stops. But because we're playing in the same key, it really doesn't matter here. If we were changing to a bunch of notes that would clash with the previous notes, then we really need to release that pedal. Also, note that the notes are varying in intensity, even across the chord. I tend to look for what the melody might be or the prevalent thing that the earworm, the part that you would want to hear. And that is what I tend to focus on in terms of the volume of the notes. I make that slightly louder than the other parts of the chord. So again, you can see that the major beats are slightly more emphasized than the in-between accents. And that especially goes for when we have small grace notes that go in between. Grace notes are notes that aren't entirely necessary to, for instance, the plot of the song, but they might add some spice or some color. Something else worth looking at is as I stack the different parts on top of the original idea, creating sub-melodies, I tend to try to keep space. So as you can see, the new parts are often landing in between the notes of the previous parts. You can actually see this if you look at the middle of the screen where you see the locations of the MIDI notes. And you can see that the parts that are on the top, they're not really cascading and landing on the beat with some of the existing parts. There's some times when you can't avoid this and you need to layer up as if it's a chord. But if you want something to sound like a melody and not like a chord, you really need to kind of spread the notes out. This is the most complex section of this part with 3 layers. And one other thing to notice is that even though this larger bar up here is 10 beats long, it's subdivided into 5. And the lowest part subdivides properly into the 5, but there are some variations in the lower part between, one group of 10 and the next group of 10 beats. So I'm varying the lower part in a way versus the upper part and the middle part. So as each part is looping, it's looping in a different number of beats in certain cases. So it's not ever quite it's taking a number of bars for the whole pattern to repeat. So it does feel repetitive because there is a part that seems to be repeating, but there are some subtle variations that, quote unquote, the player is doing to make the pattern seem to last longer. Let's play it and see if we can pick up on some of that. So we can hear that upper melody, and I'm using some accenting, as I've talked about, to make it stand out. Dun, 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 dun. So it's not da 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 da. It's da 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 da. So there's an emphasis and an accent to it. Dreamy stuff. Here's the last piece I'd like to look at today. It's temporarily titled Exotic Boxers, which is just one of the many names in my list of names for tracks that I tend to accumulate before I actually write music. I don't know what the final name will be. This only really came to me over the last few days. And I've got a basic piano part recorded. It was hard to know how to start this song, and sometimes that happens, right? You have an idea and you wonder, well, what can I do? Like, how can I lay it out? How can I arrange it? And I thought, it's better to do something than nothing. It's better not to be crippled by some kind of starting creative block that's preventing the piece from coming out. So I figured writing it out in piano, it's something I'm very familiar with. So I can't really go wrong. I'm going to write out all the parts. I'm going to write out like the structure of the piece of music. And I'm not really going to focus on a synth sound or a particular atmosphere or some kind of extraneous thing that's going to bog me down, blog me down. I'm going to be able to focus on the fundamentals. Right now, I've got, again, a stock Kontakt piano loaded just to show. It sounds like a piano player playing, but it does have an air of syntheticness to it for sure. And I'll show you the piano that I ended up using. I don't have a lot of pianos, but the ones I do, I really enjoy. So to me, that sounds a lot more human. And it's just from changing the instrument out. So if there's one big takeaway from what I'm explaining to you today, it's get 1 or 2 decent quality sample instruments, because if you have none, you're trying to make something out of very little. And you'll be doing a lot of extra work. This more or less just sounds like a piano player playing. Here's the MIDI for this middle section. Now there's some trickery I had to do in here, and you can see the pedal going up and down. It's the green. So the chord switches and the pedal has to lift. But just like I explained before, it lifts after the chord starts, and then it prevents the previous notes from ringing out. Something else to note is these notes are all relatively staccato, but you notice I have these notes up here that are dragged across multiple beats. The reason I have that is I want that note to linger across, but the pedal's going to cut it off. It's part of the melody, and I want to hear it. So my workaround was to pretend I was a piano player, and what would I do? I'd continue to hold down that note because I would know it was going to get cut off by the pedal. You can also see the different emphasis of notes down here. I'm not doing a huge amount of work to emphasize different spots, you can see that the melody is popping out above these melody notes. Ba-no, da-no. They're slightly louder than the rest. Let me take off the loop so you can hear the next part. Oh, it's just a repeat of the previous part. But as we get over here, there's a new part. There's not a lot I can do to teach you piano. That's just a lot of work on my part. I did a lot of it in my childhood, and understanding one real instrument is going to take you so far in terms of how you write everything that you do. Isn't that nice? Now on this piece, I went one farther and I copied it down onto this Prophet track. This Prophet track is actually hooked up to my live Prophet right now, which is going through some effects pedals. It's the same set of parts, and I'm really lucky that I was able to get the Prophet 10 because I have a lot of polyphony, meaning that a lot of notes can be played at once on the instrument, and I dialed in a basic sound. So I'm somewhere in the middle of starting to throw this song together where I have a real instrument hooked up, I have a virtual instrument, I've created some virtual drums, but I might replace those. Really just throwing a bunch of paint at the canvas. That's what you got to do. This is the real Prophet playing right now, behind me. Kind of sounds a little like Legend of Zelda. I think I'll do a jam of this so you guys can check it out with some basic instruments. That's probably going to be my next step. It helps me to get to know my pieces of music a little bit better, just to jam on them. I think that's all my thoughts for today, so I hope you found some of that helpful. Just keep chipping away at it. You'll get better. There's a lot to learn with music, and as long as you're having fun, you're getting somewhere.